in 1999, a very fateful year, my friend Don Gummer, who had a home and still has a home up in Salisbury, Connecticut, invited us to lunch one day, and he was giving his wife a painting, and was my husband then, not my husband now, but Henry and I looked at it, and it was by Eckert, and it was this wonderful little painting that was very traditional still life with silver and crystal and china in it, and on a beautiful white tablecloth. And then in the middle of the table was a empty white hot dog tray, which didn't fit in at all, and it just made us laugh, and we felt like there was something very special about this artist in it. He harkened back some to the 19th, early 20th century artists that we loved, but was doing something very different on it. And just segue, I have to say that one of the great moments of our life was in 2008, before Robert Rauschenberg died. He actually collected Eric's work, and he had two of Eric's paintings in his collection, one of a shirt painting and another painting, and then they went to the Rauschenberg Foundation when Rauschenberg passed. So we felt like Rauschenberg had very good taste too. So it's been a pleasure, and so that was in 1999, and Don Gummer said to me, Jane, Eric was selling through a little gallery, kind of a frame shop gallery in Sharon, Connecticut, and he would do all these beautiful little paintings, and it would sell out all the time. And like Kevin Bacon and all these everybody from that area, came and bought all of his work. But Don said he said go meet him, and they'd both gone to museum school in Boston. He said, go meet Eric, and you need to sign this guy up. And so that was great praise, and he was exactly right. So first show on him was in 2000. Right. 24 years later, this is our 24th show that we've had on him, and it's been a pleasure to work with him, and it's lasted longer than most marriages do, but here we are. And it's been a great ride. When he would talk about this area, especially Lake Warramog and the surrounding area, I could always see him light up. And he had so many stories to tell from growing up on the lake. And so that brings us here today, to him to tell us some of his stories. And so Eric, your family goes way back on the lake. Tell us about the history there.
Well, they go way back, but as you know how this area has changed so much in the last 30 or 40 years, but we were kind of the original interlopers. That my great-grandfather bought a property that became the Lakeview Inn, that became the Inn on Lake Warramog, and then everything kind of went from there, which is one of those things where you're either happy or sad about that.
And what year was that?
I think it was in the early 1890s, I think. My grandma was born in 1894, and I know they were up there by then. So they had a presence up here for a long time, and actually most of North Shore Road was owned by some Bonning or Millar, or we have two of them in the audience here, Corinne and Edmund. So they remember a lot of this old Lake Warramog tales, and it was really an amazing place.
And your house was a very early house, right?
Right, on Bliss Road, right on the corner. If anybody's been here for a while, it was a beautiful old colonial from 1753. Mm-hmm. And it's been since raised, and a much bigger, more extensive house has been built in its place. But it was an amazing little spot there, because it was kind of grand house. I didn't really realize when we were growing up how, what a cool place it was. You can take things for granted when you're a kid, but so there was cousins and uncles and aunts, and all the way down almost to the state park. And sadly, I don't think anybody holds any of that land anymore. It's only worth about $1 billion. We were just little boys, but I can remember things like we used to take my father's boat to get pizza across the lake. You know, he had a jet boat, and we would go over there and get pizza from a place called Richie's, which later became Docks, and maybe some of you people remember that place. But it was that kind of a quiet, you know, unassuming place that sort of thing seemed perfectly natural. And now maybe, you know, I don't know if you could really do such a thing anymore. The winters on the lake were so incredible in the 60s and 70s before whatever's happening to our environment, but thick ice and ice boat racing and cars out on the lake and you know, skating on Lake Warmite once when there was black ice, and I don't know if anybody knows, but there had been no snow. So this incredible lake surface, absolutely smooth as, and you could see the fish, you could see stones underneath, you know. Diving for plates, like the water was so clear when I was a young kid, you know, my father would throw these tin plates in 20 feet of water, and we could see them, we would dive down to get them. And only a few years later, the lake had a huge eutrophication, and it turned, you know, kind of pea green. And now it's been repaired all the way back to, I think it's one of the cleanest lakes in the state. But that area of the lake off of Bliss Road, Hopkins Inn, all that stuff, there was just so many, you know, family groups and parties. And I remember when I was in nursery school, we had a big party for all the nursery school kids, and this woman came to take pictures. You know, she was one of the mothers from the nursery school. It was Inga Morath, who was quite a famous photographer, and she offered my mother the whole portfolio of photos she'd taken from the nursery school picnic, and my mom said, "Oh, you pick one out." She just didn't bother, and therein goes, that's, you know.
And she was Arthur Miller's wife.
Arthur Miller's wife, and it was just a recurring theme with the Millar Bonning Forstmann group, where we would say, yeah, whatever. So let's see, my father had a boat on the lake called the Voodoo. It was a Chris Craft. It was super fast, and actually he swamped it twice. But he also saved this guy who was out of gas in the middle of the lake and brought him back, and his last name was Marks. And a couple of months later, a truck showed up at our house and dumped off an entire truckload of toys for I had 3 brothers, and we're all like, you know, only within 5 years. So, and it was a guy from Mark's Toys who had saved him in the lake. So that was sort of a, you know, a lucky break there, and played with those toys for a long time. I remember getting, one of the things was a doll, because the guy said, you know, you're all boys, but somebody has to understand, you know, that women exist in the world. So I remember that being a little bit of a thing between my brother and I. Who played with the doll? Let's see, Bill Hopkins was just a giant, you know, 6'4" farmer, dairy farmer of the old stripe. You know, had been here for the family's been here for 300 years odd. And we used to spend a tremendous amount of time on his beach, and my father and he had a Hobie cat. I don't know if you guys remember a Hobie cat. They were like catamarans, but it was brand new at the time. So like we were new on the lake with the Hobie cat, and biking around the lake when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I don't know, parents don't let their kids do that anymore because of milk cartons and all the hyper you know, safetyism that's going on with parenting, which is, I think, really problematic, because I remember feeling so independent, like being allowed to do that. My mother trusted us enough to not get into trouble and to go into New Preston and go to Purcell's, you know, store and buy gum and candy, and of course sneak a look at the Playboy magazines that were there, you know, and he went, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My brother Dean was my partner in crime for most things, and we used to stage bike accidents on the side of the road because of people coming, you know, the weekend would get incredibly busy, and there'd be so much traffic going to the state park and going around the lake. So we thought that if we were able to stage a really convincing accident, that there was no question someone was going to stop and offer us money for our hospitalization or our, you know, mental care post-accident. But it never really happened. So later we decided we would start a tomato stand. which was, moderately successful, and, that went to lemonade and, just all the kind of crazy things you think of as a kid, you think are gonna be absolute winners, and they just aren't.
Were there a lot of people and were many people that lived on the lake full time back then, or was it? I mean, your family, you did, but were there others, or was it mostly seasonal at that time?
I think that at the time it was largely a seasonal population. Houses got shut up for the entire year, and things got very quiet in the winter months. But yeah, it was. I mean, maybe it's more the same now than it was maybe 10 years after I moved away, because it became a more year-round community, and now I think it's back to being a little more seasonal. I mean, the houses are certainly quite a bit different than they were. The Mulva Hills house on the North Shore, a few things still remain from when I was a kid, but it has really tarted up considerably.
And there were how many inns on that lake?
There were 8 friendly inns on Lake Warren. I challenge anybody in the room. Anybody can do them all? Well, since I wrote them down. I'll tell you. There was the Sachem, the Hopkins, Pinnacle Valley, the Boulders, the La Grada Inn, the Lamarwick, the Birches, and the Inn on Lake Warmut. And then the casino, which was still there when I was of drinking age, and that was quite a legendary watering hole.
Tell your July 4th stories, because those were different.
Yeah, so also, it's nice to see so many people from so many different eras in the area, but I'm not sure if they do it anymore, but I remember as a kid, pretty much every landowner on the lake got a case of road flares. And so the entire 8-mile thing would be surrounded by these flares, and they'd all go off at like 10 of 9 just before the fireworks did. And so for about 15 or 20 minutes, the entire lake had this incredible pink cloud. And as a kid, it was just so magical. And looking back on it, it just seems impossible that everybody got together, and it was such a given that was going to happen. And they do. That's good. But so I worked at the Hopkins Inn for many years, and during the time, and of course they're still doing the flares now, I just heard, but Eric Sloan, if you remember, the artist from the area, very famous, and he would do the fireworks every year, and it was pretty good for a long time. But then he got a little long in the tooth, and one year had been drinking a little bit, and he set off a satellite. And if you know what satellites are, like these little spinning things, they're not terribly dangerous, like if you use them correctly, but when you throw them toward an audience, and one of them takes off and strikes like a beehive hairdo in the crowd, it becomes a much more, a bigger liability. So he asked Eric if I could take over, and funnily enough, I was named after Eric Sloan, but so I took over the fireworks the next year. And my first go around, Franz had gotten these mortars, like big professional style fireworks. And one of the mortar barrels was too short. And I said, Franz, we can't shoot it out here. It's like shooting a gun with no barrel. It's just gonna. He's like, no, don't you worry about it. You just put it in there and you'll light it off. So I did, and as predicted, the thing went about 4 feet up and shot straight down to the bottom of the lake, set the field on fire. And I ran down there, melted my sneakers. And the funny thing is the Warren Fire Department was sitting at the top of the hill with a case of beer. And, they were like, nothing's gonna happen here. And so I'm running down there, melting my sneakers, putting out hot spots. And they finally show up at the last minute, and they're like, is it all right, you got it? And they went back up to the top of the hill and finished their case of beer, and we went on. But the Hopkins, being I had a rich dad who was not terribly good at making you understood what work was, because he did a lot of reading and hanging out. And he was pretty good at smoking cigarettes and mixing scotch. But I worked for Franz Schober up there, and he really taught me what it was to have a day-to-day thing. It's called work. A lot of people do it; they receive paychecks for it, and I had no idea really what that was all about. But working for him made me realize that everything you do is a daily struggle. It doesn't really ever end. And the value is in actually the doing, not the having, not the, you know, the money, whatever. It was really in what you accomplished as a worker and what you're proud of. And I was taught that by him, which I really think was one of the most important things that ever happened to me, because I don't like scotch. I really don't like to drink that much. So my dad's lessons were not that well taken. But while at Hopkins Inn, and I'm sure some of you remember, Hopkins Inn was reviewed by Patricia Brooks in the Times, and it was like the place to go. So I would do valet parking. I was a busboy.
And you're like a teenager at this time, yeah?
Yeah, like 17, 18, 19, with a real booming times there, and meeting Dustin Hoffman and Paul Newman, Mick Jagger, Mike Nichols. It just went on and on. Really, some
and
of the
who's
most.
The one that they?
Richard Widmark, Philip Roth, Claire Bloom, James Cagney, Milos Forman. I mean, it was just incredible. I don't remember half of them, but it was an amazing place to see. You know, all of these people congregate, you know, in one place where you could get a decent hotel butter, you know, the only place that really knew what garlic butter was. But
So you told me a story one time about somebody that got turned away because they didn't recognize it.
yeah, that was, Mick Jagger came in one day for lunch, and our maitre d', who shall remain nameless, was a big Journey fan. And if you know Journey and Mick Jagger, they're sort of like on either end of the spectrum. So Mick goes in, sits down at an empty table at the window, and you know, I'm like, oh my God! And he goes up to the guy, to Mick, and says, "I'm sorry, sir, that table hasn't been set yet. You'll have to wait till we seat you." And so he slammed his thing down, got up, bolted out of the room, peeled out in his Jaguar or Porsche, whatever he had. And yeah, that was the end of Mick for us.
So what I've I've taken a lot of photographs and video of you when you're out painting. And I can tell that of all the places that you paint outdoors, when you're around Lake Warramog, it seems like there's something very special to you, something magical. I'm sure it's, you know, because of your childhood and all that. And actually around here we've got
That's South Kent. So that's not more.
Okay, okay, that's South Kent.
This is 341 and 45 intersection, sort of the gateway from the north to the lake area. That I call that the Tannerville, where all the Tanner farms are. This is and this here is the Angemine farm. And then we have back there a view from Curtis Road next to the Brooks farm, which I guess is all for sale now, which is kind of sad because you know there's no way it's going to stay 275 acres. But they all happen to be on my bus route, which was, you know, I would fall asleep and wake up and see, you know, this view or whatever. And one fine day, we were coming down Rabbit Hill Road, and this was in the foreground, and some kid threw up in the back of the bus. Kind of horrible. But Mrs. Curl, who was our bus driver, and she was like, you know, a classic, you know, foul-mouthed kind of cigarette-smoking bus driver, and but she was sweet as hell, and she said, "You're gonna want to pick your feet up." And I was like, "Why?" She's like, "Because it's coming. So we're coming down Rabbit Hill." And so here comes the contents of this kid's intestines, you know. So I picked my feet up, and she's like, "That sweater, put it on your face. I don't want you puking."
It's so clear all of these things that happened in his past, and that keen eye that he's always had in life, and there's many, many more stories you could hear.
Yeah, I could
but that
keep
keen eye is what makes him such an amazing artist, because he does see the world in a very unique and precise way. And if you could have known his mother, she was like, Carol was just amazing, and she taught you boys, I think you didn't wander too far from home, but she taught you to observe everything around you, right?
She had, we didn't know what it was at the time, but she had some serious social anxiety issues, and it was a problem. My dad was becoming a heavy drinker, and that probably had a lot to do with it. But in that, she never really let us know that there was any kind of a problem, but she would deal with the anxiety by like taking long walks in cornfields and finding arrowheads, of which she found thousands and thousands of them. And we would walk along with her, and she would explain to us, that quite often the most incredible thing you're going to see in a day just might be right there. It's not, in Timbuktu, it's not in the next state. It might be just right in front of you, but it's not if you don't walk. So my grandmother, Louise, was she was an excellent artist, and she went to the New York Academy, I believe, in like 1915, and was a really incredible draftsperson, and they had her designing wallpaper, I think, at the time, which was kind of what women were allowed to do. Sadly, they didn't get to be artists; they had to do some sort of industrial skill. And then my Aunt Jean was from what I've heard, it may not be true, but I think it is, was the first woman jewelry designer for Cartier in New York. So there's a strong vein of creative people before me. Like I said, Warren was filled with these notables, and I remember my brother first started cleaning Philip Roth's pool, and I picked up the slack after he went to college. And Philip Roth was a prince. I mean, there's many things that have been written about him, whatever, misogynist, you can say what you want. I knew him as a guy who hired me every year to move his furniture. I mowed his lawn. We had conversations that were, I just wish I'd recorded them because he was such
And
a
again,
really...
you're what, 14, 15?
No, I'm like 16 at this time.
Okay.
And so one fine day, it was before Dean stopped, and he was I was shadowing him, and we were doing the backwashing of the pool, but there were people out of the pool, and we had to go ask Phil a question. And we come out, and there's Claire Bloom, lovely. Phil, hi. Linda Lovelace? That was a shocker. And she didn't have a top on, so it was really something for a 16-year-old, something I revisit often. It was.
And I'm sure he loved every minute.
Oh, he was laughing. He was laughing. Yeah. He caught up with us. We were going out of the car. He's like, "What do you think about that?"
So obviously, a lot of you have histories and live on the lake or anything. So if you have any other questions, feel free.
I have a question because it's so wonderful to have painted the same landscape at different points in your life and being able to look from your 16-year-old self to your obviously only 45-year-old self and your 45-year-old self looking back at your 16. How does that reflect in your paintings?
Well, I think you have to, I really think I remember and try to appreciate where I am at any time, and you see what we moved away from on the lake and what it's become, and those changes are, you can't stop a beautiful place from developing. It just is doing that, and will continue to. But I think you remember to freeze the moment if you can, and that seeing and looking and staying at a place to paint something, not just taking the obligatory photograph and then bringing it home, because you can do that and you get more accurate paintings probably, and people can go like, "Oh my God, it looks like a photograph." But that's not what I want. I want people to say, "Wow, that looks like a mindograph," or what I call an emotograph, because it's coming from my own translation.
How long do you work on doing, say, a painting of this size?
Well, it's like 15, 20 minutes. No, this one was. Yeah, this is probably 2 weeks. This one was the one I did from the back of the van. That's the plein air one. This one I worked out in the studio. You can see there's a pretty strong relationship, so it's sort of just an explosion.
So how long would you have spent then on?
2 weeks probably on that thing.
But sometimes you do the whole thing outside.
Yeah. Like this is done entirely plein air. That piece was, but that took maybe 2 or 3, coming back maybe 7 or 8 times over the course of 2 weeks. This was done entirely from a pasture in South Kent. The farmer with that farm let me up into this ancient pasture, which was so incredibly cool, because when you got up there and you saw like, 70 years worth of cow pies, because they really don't go many places, they hang around for a long time. But you realize that this is like an ancient place. It wasn't a new thing, that this is a farm that was those fields have been used for something similar for 300 years or so. And I think to get that, all of a sudden, that's when your hair stands on and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is my job.
So the clouds are very prominent in all of your paintings, and you were friends with Eric Sloan.
Hell yes.
So he had some kind of an influence on
Absolutely.
that, because, I mean, it's like almost, in that particular painting, it's more than half.
Right. And I think,
In fact, in that one as well. In fact, in that one.
I think that the clouds in the sky are very important. Number one, for setting up what the weather is and what the light's going to be like. But let's face it, where would we be without the sky? It's what sustains us.
And I don't know how you do it, but you just have this ability that I always feel like they're just kind of floating off, coming toward us, and they're moving all the time, and that's I mean, you don't have to give your secrets, but.
No, it's just
amazing.
observation, and hopefully you get it right, and then when you get back to the studio, you can fine tune things so they make sense.
Can you talk a little bit about your trompe l'oeil work?
Yeah.
And how that came about?
Well, I was newly married in Hoboken, New Jersey, and jobless, as many of us Forstmanns tended to be, but I didn't have the money to back up the joblessness, and I had a son who was just born, and I took this little trompe l'oeil table into a place called Mabel's on Madison Avenue. It was a shop that was run by a woman named Peaches Gilbert, and her cat's name was Mabel, and the cat was always there, and she was a little shop right across from Pierre de, I think, and then at 72nd.
And explain what you did on the tables, you kind
I'm
of.
getting to that, Jane.
Oh, okay.
So I would paint, the very first one I did was a postcard with my view from Hoboken of the city, which was like the Empire State Building and a pencil going across, and I brought it in there to Peaches to see, and she loved it, and she said, well, why don't you leave that? I had another one with, it was a tilt top table, and I left them and drove back to Hoboken. I got back to Hoboken and my phone was ringing, and she said, we sold both of them. How many more can you get me? And I said, well, I didn't have any table, I didn't have any plan whatsoever, but that's where the trompe l'oeil started. And I did maybe 280 of those tables over the years.
Well, the funny thing was, I had seen one because I found out later that Ralph Lauren had bought one, and he had it up in his home store there with that beautiful building he has on Madison Avenue. And I remember walking in, and it had like looked like keys were on the tabletop, and I think a tube of lipstick or something like that. And my husband and I were like, oh my God, this is so wonderful. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized that it was one of their.
I'm interested in your shirts in particular.
Oh yeah, that's a good
And,
story.
and like, I see J. Crew, Tommy Hilfiger. What prompted you to choose those brands?
Well, originally I didn't put the brand names in at all, but then I thought, well, I got to give credit to the maker. So, like the Hilfiger shirt is one of the newer ones that I put the names in. But my brothers and I, my oldest brother was born in 1960, my youngest was born in 65. There was 4 of us. And when my mother had to put us into shirts to go out to dinner, to go to a friend's house or go to relatives for Christmas or whatever, it was like a half an hour, 45-minute battle, like a Civil War outbreak, and just getting them on. Mommy, she'd always button the thing up here. It was just like, it was such a crazy thing. So, and then also the Forstmann Woolen Company, they were involved in, fashion of all sorts. So, and then there's another side of the family that were all incredible business people. So all of those are mixed into the original 4-shirt painting I did in 1994. And Kevin Bacon, not to drop names, but I will incessantly, bought the first one, and Kira Sedgwick said, boy, you could do that subject again and again. I was like, really? So I started, and I have done it for.
And the first one kind of represented the 4 boys and
Right,
the family.
right. Yeah, the shirts just keep going. I think I've done about 100 paintings. And we have George Stephanopoulos, and I'm not going to go, but
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
Sold a lot of them.
Yeah.
And in Europe, we've sold them all over the world, actually.
Yeah, so it was a good move to keep painting, because that sort of keeps the studio going. That those are a few things I can guarantee you're going to sell every year, and that will kind of fuel supplies and the needs that I have to keep the studio going.
I was gonna ask, since obviously you know this area so well, you've lived here, seen everything, how do you keep your paintings fresh, and how do you find your subject matters? Are you walking around, or what are you doing to?
Well, I do a lot of driving in the area, and like I said before, I just look all the time, and the nicest time to be driving is when you're not actually behind the wheel, and then I find myself with my head totally turned to the window like a dog, because you're seeing all these things that you only see fleetingly when you're driving. And so that's really it. When things stick in my mind, I try to make a notation or remind myself later to come back to it and see if it does the same thing again.
I don't see fall or snow.
Yeah, well, I've got plenty of those back in the garage. Yeah, you want winter paintings? I got them. I love painting in the wintertime. I love painting in cold weather, but as far as commercially successful, not quite as much as summertime.
We have sold some.
We have sold some, but I do have a few back at the house. And fall is too beautiful.
It's
Absolutely too beautiful. That should exist in your
Too
memory
syrupy.
only. I've seen so many terrible liquid text inflected, large, heavy color, too much yellow, too much orange, and a thing that really can't replicate it properly,
Eric, have you explored the human form or portraiture in your career?
I can do it. I
You can
promise
do it.
you, I can. I just, other than the 50 or so people in this room, who I all love you very, very much. But I feel like humans, if I put a person in that landscape, even a small one, the question would be, what's that person doing? And that's
Where
not
your
what I
eye
wanna
goes
talk
right
about.
to the person.
Yeah, we love ourselves so much, that I feel like I don't have to perpetuate that. And, quite frankly, I don't like people that much. And I love being alone.
Do you follow your mood, or is your mood created when you see a scene that you want to paint? Or do you say, I'm in a really whimsical mood and I'm going to put myself in that?
Right.
I mean, your sense of humor that comes out, not on the
Right.
plein air,
Right.
but do you say, I just feel really whimsical today, so I'm going to sit in my studio?
Well, I think the whimsy just happens. I think you kind of come across it and think ideas occur to you. But there are definitely days when you're feeling, a little skip in your step or whatever. And then there are those darker days when you paint other things. But,
There have been times when you've started something and you said, what do you think about this? And I thought, oh, he's not in a good mood today.
Shoes, different sizes. This is elongated, that's square. I mean, is it something about the scene or just?
Yeah, it's pretty much informed by what I'm looking at. And I've done a lot of very long panoramics in the 90s and early 2000s. Because you kind of can't stop. If you're in a beautiful place, it's like, so is that tree more beautiful than that one? And is that, and so you sort of tend to go from, corner to corner and get informed by the need to have all of these features in there, because you really can't decide what's the best.
And it's an ongoing thing, because I'm like, you could get a standard size frame so much cheaper than you can. And he'll make it like 24 1/8, But that's okay, I mean, what he wants to get in there, he wants to get in there. So.
Do any of your children paint?
My daughter, Alyssa, is spectacular, and she does people almost exclusively. So she's like the other side of the coin. But she's out in Los Angeles. She's decided to work in the film industry instead of being a painter. Probably wise at one point, but with the strikes and everything, you know, I'm like, why don't you come back and be a painter? But all of them, my eldest son was a very good photographer. My number 2 son, my number 3 child, Justin, owns the restaurant Casita up in Massamoka in Massachusetts, so that's obviously very creative. And he could really draw and paint, but just completely turned his, you know, that was what Dad does, so he didn't even do it. And my youngest, Olivia, is working as an interior designer in New York. She's 24 and just really starting to hit her stride, and she knows what she loves.
And tell them who she works for.
She's working for
John Michael
Murphy, and she's just, it couldn't be a better arrangement because he's a tremendous person and has.
Is John Murphy here?
Yeah.
Oh, he's a doll.
Isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he's just, you meet him and you're like, God, I want to be friends with you. Immediately.
Yeah.
But he's a great mentor. So he's given her, she's 6'1" and a little, so she comes into the world for many years as a teenager when she was bigger than all of her friends, and she sort of like tried to be smaller. And this guy has enabled her to stand up and to be who she is, and it's watching it indescribable.
I was going to ask if you see a beautiful scene and then you paint it or you don't, and then you come back later and it has been developed. How does that feel?
It feels, you know, it's one of those things, and it happens a lot these days, especially over where I live in Sharon, in that area. You know, farmland is disappearing quickly, and you know, it's always like that's an opportunity lost personally, but the larger universal loss of, you know, what you knew was beautiful and just now isn't. And there's a house over in Smithfield. And there's the view from Smithfield looking to the east. It may be one of the most beautiful valleys, small valleys in the United States. Just absolutely, you know, all these pastures. And then this guy came up and he built this house that was just so out of keeping, and it took everybody's enjoyment of the view away because he built it in front of everything, you know, and just kind of like, you know, sighting. You know, I don't mind the house. I know you own the land, but put it somewhere where everybody else can enjoy it a little bit and then still enjoy what they always have enjoyed. You know,
About 5-star. What about
now,
Torrington?
thank you for that. Talk about teeing it up. So I'm the president of the board of directors for 5 Points Arts in Torrington, which is a phenomenal organization run by Judy McElhone, who is just an incredible organizer and director and a tremendous artist in her own right. She gave all of that up to work and to bring this thing to fruition, which we just bought the UConn campus, I think 4 years ago now. It took 2 years to close the deal. But now, if everybody in this room should go see it, because it is absolutely incredible what a rather drab university building with, you know, blue Yukon rugs and, you know, blue trim, what it's turned into now, and just a highly functional, really accessible to anybody art center with printmaking and painting and drawing and photography and ceramics and getting computers and 3D printers and things like that. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And so that's where I see the most young people. They're coming out of university for Hartford, Yale. You know, people are starting to really matriculate into that situation, and I think that that's super important that we have that, because when I came into the area, or back into the area after going to school in Boston, there was a really thriving small gallery scene everywhere. They had them, you know, this town had 3 galleries. There was a gallery in Goshen, Connecticut, believe it or not. Several in Litchfield, you know. So every village had somebody representing artists, and they're just not here anymore. And so it is very hard for young artists to grow up and develop thinking that they're going to make a living from it. They generally grow up thinking they need to know how to write a good grant, you know, or how to ask for
teach.
some type of help or to teach, you know, or to find, but there's no illustrating jobs anymore. There's, you know, the computer has taken so much, and I don't want to sound like Fred Flintstone, but I look at it like him. But it is disconcerting to see how hard it is to pass the torch, because, you know, a lot of times the hands are not there to take it. So, we'll see what happens with it over the long run. I think it'll survive, it always has, but it needs help, especially on the lower end, you know, and starting out. And I'm sort of still, you know, in the middling end, but I'm very happy with what's happened in my career, and I think I'm one of the luckiest people in the world to be able to continue to do it without any breaks. And you know, we've had never a bounce check from this woman. Never. And, you know, I know all the people who I've sold paintings to. She makes sure I know them, and there's never been any, you know, attempt to backdoor, and just a very good working relationship that I was fortunate enough to find and happen right at the right time, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that world.
And when I took your work to Florida, I wasn't sure. I mean, I loved it. I mean, we didn't take the landscape so much there, but we took the shirts and the trompe l'oeil and the still lifes. And he sent a box of paintings down the very first time, and we're like, well, we like them, you know, we'll see. We opened up the box, and the gal who was the director of the gallery called me like a couple days later. She said, "We've sold them all. Tell them to paint more." So we were off and running. So it's been a great time.
It has been.
So eat, drink. He's going to stick around.